The autumn rain drummed against the cracked windows of the Riverside Elementary School cafeteria in Cincinnati, Ohio. 10-year-old Marcus Thompson pressed his face against the cold glass, watching droplets race down the surface while his stomach growled with a familiar ache. The lunch bell had rung 15 minutes ago, but Marcus remained seated at the empty table in the corner, pretending to read a worn copy of Charlotte's Web that he'd checked out from the library 3 times already. Around him, the cafeteria buzzed with the typical chaos of elementary school lunch hour. Children laughed and chattered while unwrapping sandwiches, opening lunchboxes filled with treats, and trading snacks with friends. The smell of warm pizza and chocolate milk filled the air, making Marcus's hunger even more pronounced. He pulled his oversized hoodie tighter around his thin frame and tried to focus on the words on the page, though the letters seemed to blur together. "Hey, Marcus," called out Tommy Rodriguez from across the room. "You gonna eat today or what?" Marcus forced a smile and held up his book. "Just finishing this chapter," he replied, his voice barely audible over the cafeteria noise. The truth was, Marcus hadn't eaten lunch at school in 3 days. His mother, Sarah, had lost her job at the textile factory 2 weeks ago, and with his father having left them 2 years prior, there simply wasn't money for school lunches anymore. Sarah had filled out the free lunch application, but the paperwork was still being processed somewhere in the district's administrative maze. In the meantime, Marcus had become an expert at hiding his hunger. He'd learned to time his bathroom breaks during lunch, to carry books everywhere as props, and to perfect the art of looking busy while his classmates ate. Mrs. Henderson, the cafeteria supervisor, had noticed Marcus's pattern, but wasn't sure how to approach the situation. She'd seen too many kids in similar circumstances over her 23 years in the school system. Budget cuts had eliminated many of the informal programs that once helped children like Marcus, and the bureaucracy surrounding assistance programs seemed to grow more complex each year. As the lunch period wound down, Marcus packed his book into his backpack and prepared for afternoon classes. His teacher, Mrs. Collins, had started keeping a box of granola bars in her desk, and she'd slip him one occasionally with a knowing smile. But Marcus could tell she was being careful not to embarrass him in front of the other kids. The afternoon dragged on through math and social studies. Marcus tried to concentrate, but his empty stomach made it difficult to focus. During math class, while working on multiplication tables, he found himself calculating different scenarios instead. If a box of cereal cost $4.50 and lasted 3 days, how many boxes would they need for a month? If his mother found a job that paid $12 an hour and worked full-time, how long before they could afford groceries and still make rent? After school, Marcus walked the 8 blocks home to their small apartment in the Riverside district. The neighborhood had seen better days. Many of the houses needed paint, several storefronts stood empty, and the playground equipment in the small park was rusty and worn. But it was home, and the rent was affordable, which mattered more than anything else right now. He climbed the narrow stairs to their second-floor apartment, fishing the key from under the loose floorboard on the landing. The apartment was quiet. His mother wouldn't be home from her job interviews until evening. Marcus dropped his backpack by the door and surveyed their small kitchen. The refrigerator contained a half-empty jar of peanut butter, some bread that was starting to go stale, and a carton of milk that would expire tomorrow. He made himself a thin peanut butter sandwich and sat at their small kitchen table, making the food last as long as possible. Through their window, he could see the building across the street where old Mr. Jenkins sat on his porch every afternoon, feeding stray cats from a bag of kibble. Marcus often wondered what it would feel like to be that generous, to have enough that you could share with others. As evening approached, Sarah Thompson climbed those same stairs, her shoulders heavy with another day of rejections and "we'll call you" promises. At 34, she was attractive in a tired way, with dark circles under her brown eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, worrying about bills and groceries. She'd dressed carefully for her interviews that day, her best blouse pressed and mended where a small tear had appeared near the shoulder, and her only pair of dress shoes that she'd resoled twice. "Hey, baby," she called as she entered the apartment, forcing brightness into her voice. "How was school today?" Marcus looked up from his homework, which he'd spread across the kitchen table. "Good, Mum. Mrs. Collins said I did really well on my science test." Sarah's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's wonderful, honey. I knew you would." She paused, studying his face. "Did you eat lunch today?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus had become skilled at deflecting, but something in his mother's expression made him hesitate. She looked so tired, so worn down by the constant struggle, that he didn't want to add to her burden. "I had a big breakfast," he said finally, which was technically true. He'd eaten 2 pieces of toast with peanut butter that morning. Sarah nodded, but her expression showed she wasn't entirely convinced. She opened the refrigerator and surveyed their meager supplies, doing the same mental calculations that Marcus had performed earlier. They had enough food for maybe 3 more days if they were careful. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed in the small room they'd converted from a storage closet, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The math was unforgiving. Rent was due in 5 days, the electric bill was overdue, and she had exactly $47.83 in her checking account. Her unemployment benefits had run out, and despite 5 job interviews that week, she still didn't have steady work. She picked up the phone and dialed her sister's number in Columbus. Lisa answered on the 3rd ring, and Sarah could hear children laughing in the background. "Sarah, everything okay?" "I'm sorry to bother you, Lisa. We're having a really tough time right now." There was a pause on the other end. Lisa and her husband were doing well. He worked as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant, and she was a dental hygienist, but Sarah knew they had their own expenses with 3 kids and a mortgage. "How bad is it?" Lisa asked gently. "I don't know if we can make rent this month." "And Marcus?" Sarah's voice caught. "I think he's been skipping lunch at school because I can't afford to send him with money." "Oh, Sarah. Why didn't you call sooner?" "I keep thinking I'll find something. I've been to 12 interviews in 2 weeks. Someone has to say yes eventually, right?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. "I can send you something to help with groceries. Maybe 200? It's not much, but I can't take your money, Lisa. You have your own family to worry about." "You are my family, and Marcus is my nephew. Let me help." After they hung up, Sarah felt a mix of relief and shame. She was grateful for her sister's generosity, but it stung to need help. She'd always prided herself on being independent, on taking care of her son by herself. But pride didn't put food on the table or keep the lights on. Meanwhile, across town in the affluent Hyde Park neighborhood, Pete Rose, not the famous baseball player, but a 52-year-old restaurant owner who'd inherited both the name and a love of the game, was closing up his establishment, Rose's Kitchen. The restaurant had been his life's work, started 12 years ago with money he'd saved from his previous job as a line cook at various Cincinnati establishments. Pete had built Rose's Kitchen into something special. It wasn't fancy. The decor was simple, with red checkered tablecloths and walls covered in baseball memorabilia, but the food was exceptional and the prices were reasonable. He'd intentionally kept the restaurant accessible to working families, remembering his own childhood when eating out was a rare treat. As he counted the day's receipts, Pete reflected on how fortunate he'd been. The restaurant was profitable, not hugely so, but enough to pay his staff well and contribute to various community causes. He'd grown up in a neighborhood not too different from Riverside, and he never forgot the kindness of neighbors and local business owners who'd helped his family during tough times. His wife, Carmen, often teased him about being too generous with free meals for customers who were obviously struggling. Pete had a soft spot for families down on their luck, and he'd developed an unofficial policy of accidentally making too much food that would otherwise go to waste, then offering it to customers at drastically reduced prices. "You're going to give away all our profits," Carmen would say, but always with a smile. She'd married Pete not despite his generosity, but because of it. As Pete turned off the lights and locked up for the night, he had no idea that tomorrow would bring a chance encounter that would change 2 lives forever. The next morning brought the kind of crisp October air that made Cincinnati beautiful. The trees along the Ohio River were painted in brilliant reds and golds, and the city seemed to sparkle in the autumn sunlight. Marcus walked to school with his backpack feeling lighter than usual. Not because he had less homework, but because his mother had managed to pack him a small lunch using ingredients Lisa had brought over the night before. His aunt had driven down from Columbus with 2 bags of groceries and a gentle hug that said more than words could convey. "This is just temporary," Lisa had told Sarah. "Things are going to turn around." Marcus's lunch consisted of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, and a small bag of chips. Simple food that felt like a feast after days of going without. He ate slowly in the cafeteria, savoring each bite and trying to make the meal last as long as possible. After school, instead of heading straight home, Marcus decided to take a detour through downtown Cincinnati. He'd always been fascinated by the bustling streets, the tall buildings, and the energy of the city center. His mother didn't like him wandering far from home, but sometimes he couldn't resist exploring, especially when the weather was nice. He walked past the fountain at Fountain Square, where office workers sat eating lunch and street musicians played for donations. Marcus paused to listen to an elderly man playing guitar and singing old folk songs. The man's guitar case was open with a sign that read, "Music for Hope," and people occasionally dropped coins or bills into the velvet-lined case. As Marcus continued walking, he found himself on a street lined with small restaurants and shops. The aromas coming from the various establishments made his stomach growl despite his recent lunch. He passed a Thai restaurant where the smell of pad Thai wafted through the open door, a pizza place with steam rising from fresh-baked pies, and finally, a modest restaurant with a simple sign reading, "Rose's Kitchen." Through the large front window, Marcus could see families enjoying dinner together. A man in a white apron, Pete Rose, was moving between tables, checking on customers, refilling water glasses, and chatting with diners. There was something warm and welcoming about the scene that drew Marcus closer to the window. Pete noticed the boy outside, and their eyes met for a moment. Marcus quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring, and hurried down the street toward home. That evening, as Pete was preparing to close the restaurant, he couldn't shake the image of the thin boy who'd been looking through his window. There had been something in the child's expression, a kind of longing that Pete recognized from his own childhood memories of pressing his nose against bakery windows, dreaming of the treats inside that his family couldn't afford. The next day, Marcus found himself walking the same route home from school. He told himself he was just exploring different parts of the city, but deep down, he knew he was hoping to see Rose's Kitchen again. This time, he lingered a bit longer outside the window, watching the warm interactions between Pete and his customers. An elderly couple was celebrating their anniversary, and Pete brought them a small cake with a single candle. A family with young children was struggling to keep their toddler entertained, and Pete appeared with some crayons and a coloring sheet featuring cartoon hamburgers and hot dogs. These small gestures spoke to something Marcus had been craving without even realizing it, a sense of community, of people caring for one another. Pete spotted Marcus again, and this time decided to act on his instinct. He walked outside, wiping his hands on his apron. "Hey there," Pete said gently, approaching Marcus with the kind of careful demeanor you'd use with a skittish cat. "I'm Pete. I own this restaurant." Marcus looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just—" "You weren't doing anything wrong at all," Pete interrupted with a reassuring smile. "I was just wondering if you might be hungry. We made way too much soup today, and I hate to see good food go to waste." Marcus's first instinct was to decline politely, the way his mother had taught him. They didn't accept charity, Sarah always said. They might be struggling, but they had their dignity. But something in Pete's manner didn't feel like charity. It felt like kindness, like the offer was somehow benefiting Pete as much as it would Marcus. "I don't have any money," Marcus said honestly. "That's okay. Like I said, we made too much. You'd actually be helping me out by taking some off my hands." "What's your name?" "Marcus Thompson." "Well, Marcus Thompson, what do you say? It's chicken noodle soup, and my wife Carmen makes the best in Cincinnati." Marcus glanced through the window at the warm, inviting interior of the restaurant, then back at Pete's kind face. His stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, making the decision for him. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you." Pete led Marcus inside, and the warmth of the restaurant enveloped him immediately. The smell of garlic bread and simmering soup filled the air, and the soft lighting made everything feel cozy and safe. Pete guided him to a small table near the kitchen and returned moments later with a steaming bowl of soup, fresh bread, and a glass of milk. "There you go," Pete said, setting the food down. "Take your time." As Marcus ate, Pete busied himself with closing duties but kept a discreet eye on the boy. He watched Marcus savor each spoonful, eating with the careful attention of someone who wasn't sure when their next meal might come. It broke Pete's heart and reminded him powerfully of his own childhood experiences with hunger. When Marcus finished, he sat quietly for a moment, unsure of what to say or do next. The soup had been incredible, rich and flavorful, with tender chicken and perfectly cooked noodles. The bread had been warm and buttery, and the milk had been ice-cold and creamy. "Thank you," Marcus said finally. "That was really good." "You're very welcome. Tell me, Marcus, do you live around here?" "I live in Riverside. I go to Riverside Elementary." Pete nodded. He knew the neighborhood, a working-class area that had been hit hard by factory closures and economic changes over the past decade. Many good families were struggling there through no fault of their own. "That's a good school. What grade are you in?" "Fifth grade. I'm 10. 10's a good age. Old enough to start figuring out what you want to be when you grow up, but young enough to still believe anything is possible." Marcus smiled at that. It had been a while since an adult had talked to him like he was a person with dreams and possibilities, rather than just a problem to be solved or a mouth to be fed. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Pete asked, genuinely curious. Marcus thought for a moment. "I used to want to be a teacher like Mrs. Collins. But lately, I think maybe I'd like to do something with food, maybe be a chef or own a restaurant like you." Pete's eyes lit up. "That's a great dream, Marcus. The food business is hard work, but it's rewarding. You get to make people happy every day, bring them together around a table. There's something special about that." As they talked, Carmen emerged from the kitchen where she'd been cleaning up. She was a petite woman with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Pete introduced Marcus, and Carmen immediately understood the situation without needing explanation. "Marcus was just telling me he might want to be a chef someday," Pete said. "Is that right?" Carmen said, sitting down at the table with them. "Well, then maybe you should come back tomorrow after school. We could show you how we make some of our dishes. If your parents say it's okay, of course." Marcus felt a flutter of excitement in his chest, followed immediately by worry. "I should probably get home. My mom will be wondering where I am." Pete glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 6:30, later than he'd realized. "Of course. Where do you live exactly? I can give you a ride if you'd like." "That's okay. I can walk. It's not too far." but Pete had already grabbed his keys. "I insist, it's getting dark, and I'd feel better knowing you got home safely." During the 10-minute drive to Marcus's apartment, Pete learned more about the boy's situation. Marcus was careful not to reveal too much. His mother had taught him to be cautious with strangers, but Pete's gentle questions and genuine interest made it easy to talk. "It's just me and my mum," Marcus explained as they pulled up to his building. "She's been looking for work since the factory closed." Pete nodded understandingly. "That's tough, but it sounds like you have a good mom who's doing her best." "She is. She's the best mom in the world." "I can tell. You're a good kid, Marcus." "That doesn't happen by accident." As Marcus got out of the car, Pete rolled down the window. "Hey, Marcus, I meant what Carmen said. If you want to learn about cooking, and if your mom says it's okay, you're welcome to come by after school. We could always use an extra pair of hands, and I bet you're a fast learner." Marcus's face broke into the biggest smile Pete had seen from him. "Really? That would be amazing." "Really? Just have your mom call me if she wants to talk about it first. She can reach me at the restaurant." As Pete drove away, he found himself thinking about Marcus and wondering about the boy's mother. Pete had grown up in a single-parent household himself after his father died in a construction accident when Pete was 12. He remembered the struggle, the constant worry about money, and the way his mother had worked multiple jobs just to keep them afloat. He also remembered the people who had helped along the way, the neighbor who always seemed to have leftover casserole, the high school football coach who'd made sure Pete had proper equipment even though he couldn't afford it, the local diner owner who'd given Pete his first job washing dishes. These small acts of kindness had shaped who Pete became, and now he felt called to pass that kindness forward. Meanwhile, Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment with a lightness in his step that had been missing for weeks. When he opened the door, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread around her, job applications, bills, and what looked like government assistance forms. "Marcus! There you are. I was starting to worry." "Sorry, Mum. I met someone today, a really nice man who owns a restaurant." Sarah's expression immediately shifted to concern. "What man? What restaurant?" Marcus could see the worry in his mother's eyes and quickly explained about Pete, about the soup, about the ride home. Sarah listened carefully, her protective instincts on high alert. "He wants me to come learn about cooking after school," Marcus finished. "He said you could call him if you want to talk about it." Sarah studied her son's excited face. She could see how much this meant to him, but her first priority was always his safety. "What's this man's name?" "Pete Rose, not the baseball player. He told me people always ask about that. He owns Rose's Kitchen downtown." Sarah made a mental note to look up the restaurant online and maybe even drive by to check it out herself. But as she looked at Marcus's bright expression, she realized it had been a long time since she'd seen him this excited about anything. "We'll see, baby. Let me think about it, okay?" Marcus nodded, understanding that this was his mother's way of saying she needed to make sure it was safe, which he respected. But as he headed to his small bedroom to do homework, he couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of Rose's kitchen, about Pete's kindness, and about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. Sarah Thompson spent most of that night researching Pete Rose and Rose's Kitchen on the old laptop she'd borrowed from her sister. The restaurant had excellent reviews across multiple websites, with customers consistently praising both the food and the warm, family-friendly atmosphere. Several reviews specifically mentioned Pete's kindness and community involvement, including his participation in local food drives and fundraisers for neighborhood schools. She found a local newspaper article from 6 months earlier about small business owners who were making a difference in their communities. Pete had been featured for his practice of hiring workers from halfway houses and providing job training for people trying to get back on their feet. The article mentioned that he'd grown up in Cincinnati, attended local schools, and had worked his way up in the restaurant industry before opening his own place. By morning, Sarah had made her decision. She would visit Rose's kitchen herself, meet this Pete Rose, and make her own judgment about whether he could be trusted with her son. At school that day, Marcus found it difficult to concentrate on his lessons. His mind kept wandering to Pete's offer and the possibility of learning to cook in a real restaurant kitchen. During lunch, as he ate the sandwich his mother had packed, he found himself studying the cafeteria food service workers, watching how they prepared and served meals to hundreds of students. Mrs. Collins noticed Marcus's distraction during reading time. "Earth to Marcus," she said gently, approaching his desk. "What's got you so deep in thought today?" Marcus looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, Mrs. Collins. I was thinking about cooking." "Cooking? That's interesting. Are you helping your mom in the kitchen?" "Sort of. I met someone yesterday who owns a restaurant. He offered to teach me about cooking if my mom says it's okay." Mrs. Collins raised an eyebrow. As a teacher in a neighborhood where many families struggled, she'd learned to be cautious about adults who showed unusual interest in her students. But she also recognized that Marcus needed positive influences in his life. "That sounds exciting, Marcus. I hope your mom feels comfortable with the idea." After school, instead of heading home immediately, Marcus walked toward downtown, hoping to catch another glimpse of Rose's kitchen. He wasn't planning to go inside. He wanted to respect his mother's request to wait for her decision, but he couldn't resist walking past. As he approached the restaurant, he was surprised to see his mother standing outside, looking through the same window he'd been peering through for the past 2 days. She was dressed in her interview clothes, and Marcus could tell she was nervous. "Mom," he called out, approaching cautiously. Sarah turned, startled. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I was just walking home from school. What are you doing here?" "I thought I should meet this Mr. Rose myself. Make sure he's—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Safe," Marcus finished. "That's smart, Mom. That's what you always tell me to do." Together, they approached the entrance to Rose's kitchen. The lunch rush was winding down, and through the window they could see Pete wiping down tables and chatting with the few remaining customers. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The warm atmosphere of the restaurant immediately enveloped them. The smell of fresh bread and simmering sauces filled the air, and soft jazz music played in the background. Pete looked up from the table he was cleaning, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Marcus. "Marcus, good to see you again." His attention shifted to Sarah, and his expression became more formal, but no less friendly. "And you must be Marcus's mother." "I'm Pete Rose." "Sarah Thompson," she replied, shaking his offered hand. "I wanted to meet you and talk about your offer to teach Marcus about cooking." "Of course. I completely understand. Please have a seat. Can I get you some coffee, something to eat?" Sarah glanced around the restaurant, taking in the details, the cleanliness, the family photos and local artwork on the walls, the way other customers seemed relaxed and comfortable. "Coffee would be nice, thank you." Pete poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table, along with a glass of milk and a warm chocolate chip cookie for Marcus. "I hope you don't mind," he said to Sarah. "Carmen just pulled these out of the oven, and Marcus looks like he could use some sugar to fuel his walk home." Marcus looked to his mother for permission, and she nodded with a small smile. As he bit into the cookie, his eyes widened with delight. It was perfectly chewy, with just the right amount of chocolate chips and still warm from the oven. "This is amazing," Marcus said, with his mouth half full, then looked embarrassed by his lack of manners. Pete laughed. "Carmen will be thrilled to hear that. She's always experimenting with her cookie recipe." Sarah sipped her coffee, which was excellent, and studied Pete's face as he interacted with her son. She'd spent 10 years learning to read people, to spot the ones who couldn't be trusted, the ones who might hurt Marcus or take advantage of their situation. But Pete's warmth seemed genuine, and more importantly, he treated Marcus with respect, speaking to him like an equal rather than talking down to him. "Marcus told me you offered to teach him about cooking," Sarah said. "I did. He mentioned he was interested in maybe becoming a chef someday, and I thought he might enjoy learning some basics. Of course, I wanted to meet with you first to make sure you were comfortable with the arrangement." What exactly would this involve? Pete leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "Well, I was thinking he could come by after school a few days a week. Maybe Tuesday and Thursday to start. He could help with simple prep work, washing vegetables, learning to measure ingredients, basic knife safety, nothing dangerous, and always under supervision." Would this interfere with his homework? Absolutely not. Education comes first, always. If there were ever a conflict, schoolwork would take priority. Sarah appreciated that response. "And you wouldn't expect him to work for free?" Pete smiled. "Actually, I was hoping we could work out a fair exchange. Marcus helps us with some basic tasks, learns about cooking, and in return he gets a good meal and maybe takes something home for dinner. Plus, whatever knowledge and skills he picks up along the way." Marcus looked up from his cookie with wide eyes. "Really? I could take food home?" "If your mom thinks that's appropriate," Pete said, looking to Sarah for confirmation. Sarah felt a flutter of both pride and shame. Pride that her son was already thinking about contributing to their household. Shame that their financial situation was apparently obvious enough for a stranger to offer help. But as she looked at Marcus's excited expression, she realized her pride mattered less than his happiness and opportunity. "What about liability?" she asked, trying to think through all the practical considerations. "If he got hurt in your kitchen..." "I have comprehensive insurance that covers volunteers and part-time workers, and like I said, he'd only be doing age-appropriate tasks under direct supervision." Carmen emerged from the kitchen at that moment, as if summoned by the conversation. Pete introduced her to Sarah, and the older woman immediately put Sarah at ease with her warm smile and maternal demeanor. "I have 3 grandchildren," Carmen said, sitting down with them. 2 boys and a girl, all around Marcus's age. "I know how to keep children safe and engaged in a kitchen environment." "What does your family think about having a child around the restaurant?" Sarah asked. "Our daughter brings her kids here all the time," Pete replied. "They love helping out, and honestly, having young people around keeps us feeling young too." Sarah looked at Marcus, who was practically vibrating with excitement. She thought about the past few weeks, his careful attempts to hide his hunger, his uncomplaining acceptance of their difficult circumstances, his mature worry about their financial situation. He deserved something good in his life, something that was just for him. "What days were you thinking?" she asked. "Tuesday and Thursday after school, maybe from 3:30 to 5:30. That would give him time to get his homework done in the evening and still have time to help us with dinner prep." Sarah nodded slowly. "I want to pick him up myself, at least initially. And I'd like your phone number. And I want Marcus to call me when he arrives and when he's ready to leave. Absolutely, whatever makes you comfortable. And if at any point I decide this isn't working out, you can end the arrangement immediately, no questions asked." Sarah extended her hand to Pete. "Then I think we have a deal." Marcus let out a small cheer, then immediately looked embarrassed by his outburst. Pete and Carmen laughed, and even Sarah couldn't help but smile at her son's enthusiasm. "When can I start?" Marcus asked. "How about Thursday?" Pete suggested. "That gives us a couple days to prepare and make sure we have appropriate tasks ready for you." As they prepared to leave, Pete walked them to the door. "Sarah," he said quietly while Marcus was looking at a display case of desserts, "I want you to know that I understand how hard it is to raise a child on your own. My mother did it after my father died, and there were people who helped us along the way. I'm just trying to pass that kindness forward." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. That evening, as Marcus did his homework at the kitchen table, he couldn't stop talking about Thursday's upcoming adventure. He peppered his mother with questions about what he should wear, what he should bring, and whether he should learn any cooking terms in advance. "Just be yourself, baby," Sarah said, but she was touched by his eagerness to make a good impression. Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and reflected on the day's events. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flutter of hope. Not just because of the practical help Pete's offer represented, though the promise of regular meals for Marcus was a tremendous relief, but because someone else believed in her son, saw his potential, and wanted to invest time in nurturing it. She thought about Pete's comment about passing kindness forward, and she made a silent promise to herself. Someday, when they were back on their feet, she would find ways to help other families going through difficult times. This experience of receiving help when they needed it most would not be forgotten. Meanwhile, Pete and Carmen were having their own conversation as they finished closing the restaurant for the night. "That's a good kid," Carmen observed, wiping down the last of the tables. "He reminds me a lot of myself at that age," Pete replied. "Smart, eager to learn, but carrying some heavy worries for someone so young." "And the mother?" "She's doing the best she can in a difficult situation. I respect that she wanted to check us out first. Shows she's a good parent," Carmen nodded approvingly. "I think this will be good for all of us. It's been too quiet around here lately." As Pete turned off the lights and locked up for the night, he found himself looking forward to Thursday with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. There was something special about sharing knowledge and passion with someone who was genuinely excited to learn. And something told him that Marcus Thompson was going to surprise them all with just how much he was capable of achieving. Thursday afternoon couldn't come fast enough for Marcus. He'd spent Wednesday night organizing his backpack 3 times and had gotten up early to make sure his clothes were clean and neat. Sarah had given him a small notebook and pen in case you want to write down any tips or recipes, and he'd carefully placed them in his backpack along with his homework. At school, Marcus found it nearly impossible to concentrate on his lessons. During math class, while other students worked on fraction problems, he found himself calculating cooking measurements instead. If a recipe called for 3/4 cups of flour and you wanted to double it, how much would you need? During English class, while they were supposed to be reading silently, he kept glancing at the clock, mentally calculating how many more hours until 3:30. Mrs. Collins noticed his distraction, but decided not to comment. She'd seen the change in Marcus over the past few days. He seemed more energetic, more hopeful, and she suspected this restaurant opportunity had something to do with it. When the final bell rang, Marcus practically sprinted out of the building. He speed-walked downtown, arriving at Rose's kitchen 15 minutes early. Through the window, he could see Pete and Carmen preparing for the dinner service, moving efficiently between prep stations and checking items off what appeared to be a long list. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The familiar warmth and delicious aromas of the restaurant welcomed him, and he felt a flutter of nervous excitement in his stomach. "Marcus!" Pete called out from behind the counter. "Right on time." "Well, almost on time," he added with a grin, noting the boy's early arrival. "I was excited," Marcus admitted, slightly out of breath from his fast walk. Carmen emerged from the kitchen wearing a clean white apron and carrying a smaller apron in her hands. "Every good cook needs the proper uniform," she said, holding up the smaller apron. "I had to hem this one a bit to fit you." Marcus accepted the apron with reverence, running his fingers over the crisp white fabric. No one had ever given him a uniform for anything before, and the simple gesture made him feel important and professional. First things first, Pete said, after Marcus had tied the apron around his waist. We need to call your mom and let her know you arrived safely. Marcus used the restaurant's phone to call home, and Sarah's relief was evident in her voice when she heard from him. Have fun, baby. Learn lots. I'll see you at 5:30. With the check-in complete, Carmen led Marcus into the kitchen. It was larger than it appeared from the dining room, with gleaming stainless steel surfaces, multiple burners, 2 ovens, and an array of equipment that Marcus couldn't begin to identify. Rule number 1 in any kitchen, Carmen began, is cleanliness and safety. We wash our hands frequently, we keep our work surfaces clean, and we never, ever rush with sharp objects. She showed Marcus to a hand-washing station and demonstrated the proper technique. Soap, warm water, scrub for 20 seconds, dry with a clean towel. You'll do this every time you enter the kitchen, every time you handle raw ingredients, and any time your hands get dirty. Next, she gave him a tour of the kitchen, explaining the purpose of different stations and equipment. The prep area where vegetables were chopped and ingredients measured. The hot line where orders were cooked and plated. The dish pit where everything was cleaned and sanitized. The walk-in cooler where ingredients were stored at proper temperatures. It might seem overwhelming at first, Carmen said, noticing Marcus's slightly dazed expression. But you'll learn gradually. We're not going to throw you into the deep end on your first day. Pete joined them in the kitchen, carrying a clipboard with what looked like an inventory list. Ready for your first lesson? He asked Marcus. Marcus nodded eagerly. Today, we're going to start with knife safety and basic vegetable prep, Pete explained. These are fundamental skills that every cook needs to master. He led Marcus to a prep station where several cutting boards, knives of different sizes, and a variety of vegetables were laid out. Pete picked up a medium-sized chef's knife and held it properly, demonstrating the correct grip. The knife is a tool, not a weapon, he said seriously. When you respect it and use it properly, it makes your work easier and safer. But if you're careless or try to rush, you can get hurt. Pete showed Marcus how to hold the knife with his dominant hand while using his other hand to guide the food being cut, keeping fingertips curled under and knuckles forward to protect them from the blade. He demonstrated proper cutting techniques on an onion, his movements smooth and confident. Your turn, Pete said, handing Marcus a smaller knife and placing a carrot in front of him. We'll start simple. Just slice this into rounds, nice and slow. Marcus gripped the knife carefully, trying to mimic Pete's technique. His first few cuts were uneven and hesitant, but Pete was patient and encouraging. Good form, Pete said. Don't worry about speed right now. Focus on control and consistency. Speed comes with practice. Yeah, as Marcus worked on the carrot, Carmen began preparing ingredients for the evening soup special, a hearty minestrone that required lots of fresh vegetables. She worked nearby, available to help if needed, but allowing Marcus to focus on his task. Pete tells me you're interested in maybe becoming a chef someday, Carmen said as she diced celery with practiced efficiency. I think so, Marcus replied, concentrating on keeping his carrot slices even. I never really thought about it before, but being here, seeing how you make food that makes people happy, it seems like something I'd like to do. It's hard work, Carmen said honestly. Long hours, hot kitchens, and you're on your feet all day. But it's also creative and rewarding. Every plate that goes out to a customer is like a little gift from you to them. Marcus finished his carrot and looked up at Carmen with a question in his eyes. She examined his work, nodding approvingly. Very good for your first try. The slices are reasonably consistent and you kept your fingers safe. That's exactly what we want to see. Pete appeared with another vegetable, a bell pepper this time. Ready for something a little more challenging? Marcus spent the next hour learning to prep various vegetables under careful supervision. He learned to remove seeds from peppers, to peel potatoes efficiently, and to separate broccoli into uniform florets. With each task, his confidence grew, and his movements became more natural. Around 4:30, the pace in the kitchen began to pick up as Pete and Carmen prepared for the dinner rush. Marcus watched in fascination as they transformed from teachers into a synchronized cooking team, communicating in shorthand and moving around each other with practiced ease. "Can I watch you cook?" Marcus asked during a brief lull. "Of course," Pete said, "but first, let's see if we can find a way for you to help." He showed Marcus how to plate salads, arranging lettuce, tomatoes, and other ingredients in an attractive presentation. It was simple work, but Marcus took it seriously, trying to make each salad look as good as the last. As customers began arriving for dinner, Marcus felt the energy of the kitchen change. Orders came in through a small window from the dining room, and Pete and Carmen sprang into action. Marcus continued with his salad duties, stealing glances at the more complex cooking happening around him. He watched Pete saute chicken with herbs and white wine, the pan sizzling and filling the air with incredible aromas. He saw Carmen check pasta for doneness, tasting it quickly before draining it perfectly al dente. He observed how they communicated constantly. "Behind you, hot pan coming through. How long on the salmon?" Keeping each other safe and informed in the busy space. "This is amazing," Marcus breathed during a momentary quiet spell. Carmen smiled. "It is pretty exciting, isn't it? When everything clicks and you're working as a team to create something delicious, there's nothing quite like it." At 5:20, as the initial dinner rush began to slow, Pete approached Marcus's station. "How did you like your first day in a professional kitchen?" "It was incredible," Marcus said honestly. "I loved every minute of it. Even the washing and chopping, that's not the glamorous part of cooking. I liked that too. It felt important, like I was really helping." Pete exchanged a meaningful look with Carmen. It wasn't often they met someone, especially someone so young who appreciated even the basic foundations of kitchen work. "Well, you were helping," Pete said. "Those salads you plated went out to real customers who enjoyed them. You contributed to their dining experience." "Ooh." As Marcus untied his apron and gathered his things, Carmen approached with a container wrapped in aluminum foil. "A little something for you and your mom," she said. "Leftover minestrone soup and some fresh bread. The soup is even better the next day after the flavors have had time to blend." Marcus accepted the container gratefully. "Thank you. This smells amazing." "Before you go," Pete said, "I want to give you something to think about for next time. I'd like you to start a cooking journal. Write down what you learn, techniques you want to remember, maybe ideas for dishes you'd like to try someday. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a way to track your progress." Marcus's eyes lit up. "Like a real chef would do?" "Exactly like a real chef would do. Many professional cooks keep notes about recipes, techniques, and ideas. It's how you continue to learn and grow." At precisely 5:30, Sarah arrived to pick up Marcus. She could see the excitement radiating from her son as he practically bounced on his toes, waiting for her. "How did it go?" she asked Pete and Carmen. "He was wonderful," Carmen said warmly. "A natural learner, very respectful, and he really listened to instruction. And he has good instincts," Pete added. "He asks thoughtful questions and takes his time to do things right. Those are important qualities in cooking." As they walked to Sarah's car, Marcus chattered excitedly about everything he'd learned and seen. He described the proper way to hold a knife, the importance of mise en place, having all ingredients prepared and organized, and the incredible teamwork he'd witnessed during the dinner service. "And Carmen gave us soup," Marcus said, holding up the container. "She said it's even better tomorrow after the flavors blend." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It had been so long since she'd seen Marcus this animated about anything. The past few months of worry and struggle seemed to melt away as she listened to him describe his afternoon. That evening, as they shared Carmen's minestrone soup and fresh bread, Marcus pulled out his notebook and began writing his first journal entry. He wrote about knife safety, about the different vegetables he'd prepped, about the energy of a working kitchen during dinner service. "What should I call my journal?" he asked his mother. Sarah thought for a moment. "How about Marcus's culinary adventures?" Marcus grinned and carefully wrote the title on the first page. As he continued writing, documenting everything he could remember from his first day, Sarah felt a sense of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. For the first time in months, Marcus was focused on something positive, something that challenged him and made him feel valued. Pete and Carmen had given him more than just a learning opportunity. They'd given him hope, purpose, and a glimpse of what was possible when people believed in you. As she watched her son write in his journal with careful concentration, Sarah made a silent vow. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would make sure Marcus could continue this journey. He deserved every opportunity to pursue his dreams, and she would move mountains to make it happen. Meanwhile, back at Rose's kitchen, Pete and Carmen were having their own debrief of Marcus's first day as they finished cleaning up. "That boy has something special," Carmen observed, wiping down the prep station where Marcus had worked. "He was so careful, so eager to learn. And did you see how he watched us during service? He was absorbing everything." Pete nodded, stacking clean plates in their designated spots. "He reminds me of myself when I first started in kitchens, hungry to learn, willing to do whatever needed to be done, and respectful of the craft." "Do you think he'll stick with it?" "I think so, but even if cooking doesn't end up being his path, the things he learns here, discipline, teamwork, attention to detail, taking pride in your work, those will serve him well no matter what he chooses to do." Carmen smiled. "I think Tuesday can't come fast enough for him." "Or for us," Pete added. "It's been good to have that energy in the kitchen again. Reminds me why I fell in love with this business in the first place." As they turned off the lights and locked up for the night, both Pete and Carmen felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond the successful dinner service. They were building something with Marcus, investing in a young person's future, and continuing the cycle of kindness that had once helped them along their own paths. 2 months into Marcus's apprenticeship at Rose's kitchen, the transformation was remarkable. What had started as simple vegetable prep had evolved into a comprehensive education in culinary arts, business management, and life skills. Marcus now arrived at the restaurant with the confidence of someone who belonged there, greeted regular customers by name, and could execute basic cooking techniques with increasing skill and precision. His journal, which had started as a few scattered notes about knife safety, had grown into a detailed record of recipes, techniques, and observations about the restaurant business. He wrote about the importance of timing in a busy kitchen, the art of seasoning food properly, and the satisfaction of seeing customers enjoy dishes he'd helped prepare. But more than technical skills, Marcus had gained something even more valuable, a sense of belonging and purpose that had been missing from his life. Pete and Carmen had become more than employers. They were mentors, surrogate family members, and believers in his potential. The afternoon of December 15th started like any other. Marcus arrived at Rose's kitchen after school, washed his hands thoroughly, and tied on his apron, which had become as familiar as his school uniform. The restaurant was preparing for their annual holiday party, a tradition Pete had established years earlier where they closed to the public for one evening and hosted a celebration for their regular customers, neighbors, and friends. "Big night tonight," Carmen said as Marcus entered the kitchen. "Are you ready to help us pull off something special?" Over the past weeks, Marcus had been learning to prepare some of the dishes for the party. Under careful supervision, he'd mastered the art of making perfect meatballs for Carmen's famous spaghetti and meatballs, learned to prepare Pete's signature garlic bread, and could now make a Caesar salad that rivaled those of many professional cooks. "I've been practicing the meatball recipe at home," Marcus said proudly. "Mom said they were even better than last time," Carmen beamed. "Practice makes perfect. Tonight you'll be in charge of all the appetizers, while Pete and I handle the main courses." The responsibility felt enormous and exciting. Marcus had never been solely responsible for an entire part of a meal service, but Pete and Carmen's confidence in him was unwavering. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus worked with focused intensity. He prepared dozens of stuffed mushrooms, rolled and baked pinwheels of puff pastry filled with herbs and cheese, and arranged beautiful platters of antipasto with careful attention to color and presentation. Around 5 p.m., guests began arriving for the 6 o'clock celebration. Marcus watched through the kitchen window as the dining room filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Rodriguez, who came in every Tuesday for lunch. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, who celebrated their anniversary at Rose's Kitchen every year. The Hartwell family, whose teenage daughter always requested Marcus's salads because he makes them with extra love. But the biggest surprise came when Marcus's mother arrived, dressed in a new blouse he'd never seen before, with Lisa and her family in tow. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked, emerging from the kitchen with flour still dusting his apron. "Pete invited us," Sarah said, her eyes bright with pride. "He said you were going to be responsible for all the appetizers tonight, and he thought we should see our chef in action." Marcus felt a flush of pride and nervousness. Having his family there to witness his work added pressure, but also made the evening feel even more special. As the party got into full swing, Marcus orchestrated the appetizer service with the composure of someone much older than his 11 years. He made sure each platter was perfectly presented, timed the hot items to come out of the oven at optimal moments, and even interacted with guests who complimented his food. "Young man," said Mrs. Rodriguez, stopping by the kitchen window, "these mushrooms are extraordinary. You should be very proud." Marcus blushed but stood a little taller. "Thank you. I learned the recipe from Carmen, but I added a little extra oregano because I thought it would make them more flavorful." Pete overheard the exchange and felt a surge of mentor's pride. Marcus wasn't just following recipes, he was beginning to understand flavor profiles and make creative decisions. That instinct couldn't be taught, it had to be nurtured and encouraged. Midway through the evening, Pete called for everyone's attention. The dining room quieted as guests turned toward him, wine glasses in hand and faces flushed with good food and warm conversation. "Every year at our holiday party, I like to take a moment to reflect on what makes Rose's Kitchen special," Pete began. "It's not just the food, though Carmen and I are pretty proud of that," he said to appreciative laughter. "It's the community we've built together, the relationships we've formed, and the way we've been able to support each other." He paused, his eyes finding Marcus in the kitchen doorway. "This year has been particularly special because we've had the privilege of working with a young man who has reminded us why we fell in love with cooking in the first place. Marcus Thompson has been learning with us for the past 2 months, and I can honestly say he's taught us as much as we've taught him." Marcus felt his cheeks burn as the entire restaurant turned to look at him. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the recognition her son was receiving. "Marcus," Pete continued, "your dedication, your enthusiasm, and your natural talent have been an inspiration to all of us. You approach every task with care and respect. You ask thoughtful questions, and you've shown that age is just a number when it comes to passion and commitment." Carmen appeared beside Marcus with a wrapped package in her hands. "We have something for you," she said softly. With shaking hands, Marcus unwrapped the gift to reveal a professional quality knife roll containing a set of cook's knives, each one perfectly sized for his hands. A small engraved plate on the roll read, "Marcus Thompson, future chef." The restaurant erupted in applause as Marcus stared at the gift in amazement. He'd seen similar knife rolls in cooking shows and magazines, but never imagined he might own one himself. "Every serious cook needs quality tools," Pete said. "These will grow with you as you continue learning." Marcus tried to speak, but found his throat tight with emotion. Finally, he managed to say, "Thank you. This is the best present I've ever received." But Pete wasn't finished. "There's something else. Carmen and I have been talking, and we'd like to offer you a more formal position here, not just helping after school, but a real part-time job with real responsibilities and real pay." Sarah gasped audibly from her table. Marcus looked at Pete with wide eyes, not quite believing what he was hearing. "We'd like you to work with us 3 afternoons a week and Saturday mornings. You'd be our prep cook and apprentice, with a path to learning every aspect of the restaurant business, and we'd pay you a fair wage for your work." The room was silent as Marcus processed the offer. A real job with real pay, doing something he loved more than anything he'd ever discovered. It felt like a dream. "What do you say?" Carmen asked gently. Marcus looked across the dining room to his mother, who was crying openly now. She nodded encouragingly, and Marcus turned back to Pete and Carmen. "Yes," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." The restaurant erupted in applause again, with guests rising to their feet to celebrate Marcus's promotion. Mrs. Rodriguez shouted, "Bravo!" and the Hartwell family whistled their approval. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus found himself surrounded by people offering congratulations and encouragement. Several regular customers promised to request his recommendations on future visits, and one elderly gentleman even asked for his autograph for "when you're a famous chef someday." After the last guest had left and the cleaning was finished, the 4 of them, Pete, Carmen, Marcus, and Sarah, sat around a table in the now quiet restaurant, sharing leftover dessert and reflecting on the evening. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said to Pete and Carmen. "What you've done for Marcus, for both of us, goes beyond generosity. You've changed our lives." "You don't need to thank us," Carmen replied. "Marcus has earned everything he's received. His work ethic, his attitude, his natural talent, those are his own gifts." Pete nodded in agreement. "We've just provided the opportunity. Marcus did the rest." Marcus sat quietly, running his fingers over his new knife roll, still somewhat overwhelmed by the turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a hungry kid trying to hide his circumstances from his classmates. Now he had skills, purpose, income, and most importantly, a clear vision of his future. "I want to keep learning," Marcus said finally. "Not just cooking, but everything about running a restaurant. I want to understand the business side, the customer service, how to manage inventory, all of it." Pete smiled. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. Carmen and I have been thinking about expanding, maybe opening a second location someday. We could use a partner who understands our values and shares our vision." "A partner?" Marcus's eyes widened. "Not right away," Pete laughed. "You've got high school to finish, maybe culinary school if you choose to go that route. But someday, if you're interested, there could be a place for you in the ownership of this business." As they prepared to leave that night, Marcus took one last look around the restaurant that had become his second home. The tables where he'd served his first customers, the kitchen where he'd learned to cook, the window where he'd first pressed his hungry face against the glass months earlier. Sarah put her arm around her son's shoulders as they walked to the car. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You've worked so hard for this." "I couldn't have done it without Pete and Carmen believing in me," Marcus replied, "and without you supporting me every step of the way." "What do you think happens next?" Sarah asked as they drove through the Cincinnati streets, past the neighborhoods where Marcus had first wandered hungrily, past the school where he'd once hidden his empty lunch table. Marcus thought for a moment, his hand resting on his new knife roll. "I think I keep learning, keep working, keep getting better, Maybe I'll go to culinary school. Maybe I'll work in other restaurants to learn different styles of cooking. But someday, I want to have my own place where I can help other kids who are hungry, who need someone to believe in them. Sarah smiled in the darkness of the car. Her son had learned more than cooking techniques and business skills at Rose's Kitchen. He'd learned about community, about paying kindness forward, about the power of believing in someone's potential. 3 years later, Marcus would graduate from high school with honors while working as the sous chef at Rose's Kitchen's second location, which he'd helped Pete plan and open. He'd receive a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America with a recommendation letter from Pete that brought tears to the admissions committee's eyes. 5 years after that, he'd returned to Cincinnati as an accomplished chef, ready to open his own restaurant in the Riverside neighborhood where he'd grown up. The restaurant would be called Second Chances, and it would feature a program where local kids could learn cooking skills, earn money, and discover their own potential, just as Marcus had. But on this December evening, as Marcus sat in the passenger seat of his mother's car, holding his first set of professional knives and dreaming about the future, none of that was visible yet. What mattered was that a hungry boy had found more than food at Rose's Kitchen. He'd found family, purpose, and the unshakable belief that with hard work, kindness, and someone willing to invest in your dreams, anything was possible. The story of Marcus Thompson and Pete Rose would become local legend in Cincinnati, told and retold as an example of how a single act of kindness can change not just one life, but ripple outward to affect an entire community. Because hunger, as they both learned, is about more than food. Sometimes what people need most is simply for someone to see their potential and give them a chance to prove themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that chance comes when you need it most, served with a bowl of warm soup and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today.